Hello and welcome to the Pitchside Podcast. I am your host, the HOD of the BSB. Like, share, comment on the YouTube version of this podcast and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Enable notifications to receive all the updates from these episodes of the podcast and all the content on the channel, of course. Follow us on social media and my site BSB on Twitter, Pitchside Pod on Instagram, and help us on the way on our first K here on the channel. Listen to us on Spotify, Google Podcast or any other platform, and join us here for the last weekend preview of the season and episode 166. Before we talk about the Champions League final preview, let's get into some transfer news instead. And of course, it was a busy day in Italy yesterday. It was a pretty wild, I would say, day in Italy as Inter Milan announced that Simone Inzaghi is joining them from Lazio. Just I mentioned yesterday in the podcast that Simone Inzaghi refused, or reports were suggesting that Simone Inzaghi refused to join Inter Milan. It turns out, no, he didn't. He accepted the move, of course, on a 2-year contract with Inter Milan. Certainly, that refutes the potential of the likes of Allegri, and so did Zidane as well, coming to that club. And speaking of Massimiliano Allegri, he is going to be joining Juventus back, according to all reports. Of course, the announcement is to be expected soon in the next few hours. At the very best, it's going to be a pretty huge return, I would say. And also reports suggesting, according to that Cristiano Ronaldo might be on the way out of the club because of the issues he had with Allegri last time they were there. Of course, Allegri had only one season as the head coach of Juventus with Cristiano Ronaldo. He coached him in his first season back in Juventus in 2018-19. But definitely, this might be the new project that Massimiliano Allegri is heading towards, with potentially Dybala as the sort of head figure in this project instead of Cristiano Ronaldo, who could be leaving this summer regardless of the situation, whether Juventus made it to the Champions League or not. Still speaking, of course, about managers, Luciano Spalletti is close to joining Napoli as well. It's a big move, really. Managerial merry-go-round is really taking full effect in Italy this season. Loads of teams are changing managers, and obviously most of them are going back to old faces. Maybe Inter Milan going to Simone Inzaghi is pretty new on some level, but definitely Massimiliano Allegri being back to Juventus, Spalletti being back to Napoli, coaching Napoli is a pretty unsurprising sort of kind of way, because finances at the moment are at a really low. Inter Milan have a big financial problem. The Milan sides have a big financial problem. Juventus, of course, with the Super League not going forward, they had a huge financial hit, so they will try and go to the well maybe too many times and go in towards players that they or managers that they really know and they could trust. Speaking of managers, to close this managerial merry-go-round as well, Mauricio Pochettino is close to returning to Tottenham, according to a lot of reports. The coach, of course, the Portuguese coach, still wants to, the Argentine coach, still wants to return to Tottenham Hotspur. Maybe the talks have been officially held with the coach, and we don't know if it's going to be the case of him returning to Tottenham. That would be too soon, but that wouldn't be surprising. He didn't win the league with PSG. He didn't get far in the Champions League. He didn't reach the final pretty much in the Champions League, and he didn't really set the season on fire with PSG. I mean, he was less successful than Thomas Tuchel was with Pochettino with PSG. That's what the gist of it is. Pochettino maybe returning to Tottenham. Is it the right move to return to Tottenham now, after appointing Ryan Mason and all of that, and after the season that they had with Harry Kane potentially leaving? Maybe he would convince Kane to stay and convince him with redoing the same project that they did back in the day that led Tottenham to be in the Champions League final and all of that. It's a really, really weird situation for Mauricio Pochettino, and we'll see how this is going to end up. In the rest of the transfer news, Mike Mignon is officially joining AC Milan until 2026, a 5-year or a 4-year deal, is agreed with the player. 13 million euros is going to be the fee of the transfer, for, of course, with add-ons for Lille and bonuses. Of course, Mike Mignon has been one of the most highly sought goalkeepers in the world last season. He had a tremendous season with Lille and has proven himself to be one of the most rising goalkeepers in world football. Of course, he earned a place in the French squad for the Euros and might be actually the number one goalkeeper for France in the Euros. It would not surprise me at all if I see him take Lloris's places, although it would be really rough to see that happen from a Didier Deschamps perspective. Elsewhere, Omar Richards is joining Bayern Munich until 2025, coming from Reading. Of course, the left-back sensation has been always scouted by Bayern Munich. The deal almost went ahead last season, but because of other considerations, it didn't, and now it happens officially. Omar Richards is joining Bayern Munich until 2025. That's going to be adding a lot of options in the left-back position, as well as allowing Lucas Hernandez maybe to move to a centre-half position and start regularly there, get more play time next season. Ending up, Gregory Kobel is very close to join Borussia Dortmund from Stuttgart, or all the reports according to the German media that Gregory Kobel wants that move. Borussia Dortmund want the move, and of course there was no chance that they would bring any other goalkeeper Borussia Dortmund, because there were murmurings about maybe Marc-Andre ter Stegen leaving Barcelona to Borussia Dortmund actually, but that won't happen, and Gregory Kobel seems to be the close option to join Borussia Dortmund. Let's get into the more important business now, and let's talk about the UEFA Champions League final, the second place on Saturday in the Estádio de Dragão in Porto. It's going to be Manchester City versus Chelsea, and that is going to be such a tough game to break down. Of course, the whole campaign really is on one side, and the final is a different thing for both sides. They definitely had a sort of a similar story in their season, two halves of their season, albeit the achievement and the accomplishments in the end are pretty different. Chelsea, they had the Lampard era and the Tuchel era with very, very stark contractions between the two phases. With Lampard, Chelsea maybe tried to be too smart at a certain point. They tried to be too cheeky, too clever with the ball, tried to look sexy football and all of that, but they definitely couldn't. They ignored the defensive department, which of course hurt them in the early going to the season, with the signings still not hitting their form yet, and of course they were under all sorts of criticism. Lampard was under all sorts of criticism. The signings, of course, the likes of Kai Havertz, Timo Werner particularly, received a lot of abuse, I would say, and definitely they weren't hitting the points that they should have been hitting. With Thomas Tuchel, the focus was more on getting things tight, getting the job done with minimal effort, with the signings actually improving, Thiago Silva giving Chelsea more leadership and solidity in the defence, which they needed. Kai Havertz, of course, becoming more regular, contributing significantly to Chelsea's attack, while Timo Werner, for all the abuse he gets, I would say that he improved massively, more than anybody gives him credit for, albeit his goal return is still pretty underwhelming for his value and hype. When you bring him in for 50 million euros from Leipzig, you really expect more of sorts of the goal return from him. At the moment, he only scored 11 goals overall in the season, and definitely that is pretty weak for someone of his talent and of his expectations, by the way, from him at Chelsea. His future was up in the smoke because of that at a certain point. Man City started slow as well. They were in a very unenviable position in the early goings of the season. They were 10th at table at certain points. They looked sort of very, very shaky. And whereas Chelsea didn't have a super signing that turned the season around, Man City did, and they had one in Ruben Dias, who added so much strength and guarded the City's defence. Not just that, he also improved the performances of the defenders around him. We saw a different version of Stones with him. We saw a different version of Laporte with him. Guardiola can take a lot of credit for this turnaround of the season, because he has some tactical maturity and flexibility that he didn't have before. He was accepting to change his philosophy, his sort of methods of approaching games and all of that. And the most important part in all of this is that he is doing less overthinking than usual, which is a big change from the usual Guardiola that we saw in the Champions League. He accepts to defend at a certain point, accepts to have less of the ball, accepts to have less control. The PSG games in the Champions League, I think, are the big example of that. In addition, City finally feel the season like a well-built, proper squad that is united in complete harmony, complete chemistry, with no difference pretty much between an A team and a B team. Loads of players standing out. You have Gundogan, you have De Bruyne, you have Foden, you have Mahrez, Zinchenko, João Cancelo, Fernandinho for a 36-year-old who still plays like that, still is a utility player. Whenever he plays for the team, he gives 100%, with some notable exceptions, of course. It can't be all sunshine and rainbows. In particular, Raheem Sterling and Aguero, the former, losing his form and place to the team pretty much to Phil Foden and Riyad Mahrez, reverting back to his bad form from a couple of seasons ago. And the latter, of course, Aguero season being marred with injuries, COVID, lack of play time, and certainly the new formation that Guardiola uses with no striker doesn't really help Aguero get too much time and get too much play with that squad. The previous 3 games really between those two sides cannot be taken as standards. I mean, this is a Champions League final. This is different. And also the games that they had, each one has its own story. The first one, that City completely rolled over really, Chelsea 3-1, was pretty much, a run-of-the-mill kind of game, with Chelsea still being in their sort of confused case, all over the place, not knowing what they're doing, not having a proper shape about them. The second game was, of course, the game in the Cup, in which both teams sort of changed their ways, and Thomas Tuchel sort of surprised Guardiola with the way they was playing. Of course, not that Guardiola doesn't know that, but certainly it took City by surprise. They couldn't deal with it quite easily, and it took them a while to understand it. And by that time, Chelsea scored their goal and managed to seal the game for themselves. The latest game, though, is really, it was pretty much a rest for most of the players on both sides. City wrapping up the title already and looking ahead at the Champions League final. Chelsea would still, of course, needed that game, and they won that game certainly, because had they lost that game, maybe they would have lost that top 4 spot. But definitely for Man City, it was pretty much a resting game. You saw they started with Sergio Aguero in the game. You started with Raheem Sterling, as I mentioned, 2 players that didn't have exactly the greatest of seasons. Chelsea entered this game as underdogs. This might serve them really well. It gives them a lot of momentum, I would say, while it gives City pressure, of course, because they have on paper the strongest squad, or the strongest the stronger squad and the stronger players. With favouritism doesn't work in their way really. It didn't do them any good in the FA Cup final for Chelsea against Leicester. They dominated the game really well, but somehow they didn't win. And certainly, entering as underdogs could be really good for Chelsea, while City, of course, they have to play their own way. That is what they have to do, really. They have to find the same rhythm, the same momentum that they found all the season in the Champions League, and they just have to, find that tune, find that moment where they could score, really, and take the game by the scruff of the neck. In my opinion, I think every team has a big worry tactically, or a big sort of issue, a dilemma to deal with. For Chelsea, it definitely should be who's going to be the front 3 playing, because I'm not exactly having any doubts about who's going to be playing from the back going forward. Mendy's available, Kante's available, so those 2 players are a shoe-in for that lineup, definitely. You have Thiago Silva, Rudiger and Azpilicueta, at the very least Christensen. That is your 3 at the back, we know that. Reece James, Ben Chilwell, Kante and Jorginho or Kovacic, according to to some people. Kovacic is available. We'll see how fit he is, but it looks like Kante and Jorginho will be there. And obviously the problem would be whose plays up front. Werner, Mount and Pulisic, Werner, Mount and Ziyech, Mount and Havertz, loads of options. Maybe Mount is a shoe-in as well. Thomas Tuchel considers him his best player and all of that, so he's a shoe-in for that position. So definitely it's all about the other players around him. It's all about who's going to be the second wide player in those 3, and then of course who are going to be playing up front as your top man. I think maybe you use Havertz. You have it as a sub. I would say late on, Mount, Ziyech, and Werner could be a proper 3 start. Pulisic coming on of the bench with, of course, Hudson-Odoi were coming on of the bench as well, and you have Kai Havertz as an option as well, coming off and helping you open spaces, of course, with his smart movement and all of that. It would be quite a dilemma for Tuchel, but he will try and do his very best to pick the best 3 that he could come up with. From the Chelsea camp, Guardiola's team selection, he has all players available, of course, he has no injury worries and all of that, but definitely overthinking could be a big mistake for his. He could try and surprise Chelsea with some sort of lineup, and he ends up, falling in the same trap that he fell in for the last 4 years practically in the Champions League, which is overthinking things to a ridiculous extent, which he shouldn't be doing. He should be playing simple. He has all the players available. He shouldn't be messing up the lineup. He should be playing pretty much the same players that he's using. I think a Rodri, Gundogan, Bernardo Silva kind of midfield 3 with or a Rodri, Gundogan, De Bruyne midfield 3 with Riyad Mahrez, Phil Foden, and Gundogan as a false 9 could be really working wonders for him, which it did this season. I mean, Gundogan is his top scorer for Man City, and it really helped them win the title and really helped them be the team that they were this season, with a great version of them, really being so mature, being so self-aware really of what they should do in the game and how they should do it with less effort possible. My predictions for the game, I would say Man City are going to win. I'm not going to think. I don't think that Chelsea will have it in them to beat them 3 times. Not because of a superstition kind of thing, but because Man City should be already knowing them, should already crack them. Guardiola, I don't think that he can get beaten by one coach 3 times in a row, which is going to be hard. So I think Guardiola should have learned his lessons, should have known what should do, pick his squad right, and should probably play the right tactics to counter Thomas Tuchel game. Of course, it's going to be played on the big details. Certain details are going to decide this game. Maybe set pieces, maybe a defensive mistake. Who knows what's going to be decided in this game? But it probably will be a tight one, and mostly it will be an unenjoyable watch. But hopefully it is. Hopefully I'm wrong about this. I predict Man City to win the game. I think it's going to be a narrow score, a 2-1 at the very best, and they will be champions in my opinion. Let's transition swiftly from the Champions League preview to the Premier League review of the season. Of course, since the 2 sides are English, of course, that really segues us nicely into talking about the Premier League season overall. And let's start with the champions, Man City, of course, 86 points, deserving of their title, of course, with a big margin over Man United second with 12 points over Man United at second, 74 points, 69 for Liverpool, and Chelsea 67. They make the top 4. Leicester, West Ham, the Europa League spots, and Tottenham into the new UEFA Conference League. Man City deserving champions, I would say. They had to pretty much do 2 periods in their season, not exactly 2 halves, but 2 periods in their season. The period before Ruben Dias or the period after Ruben Dias. I mean, 2 complete opposite, I would say. Dias adding so much solidity to the Man City squad, giving them too much strength in defence. One of the best defences, becoming one of the best defences in Europe, really, and that is proven by being the strongest defence in the Premier League with 32 goals conceded, which is, very low, I would say, considering Premier League standards, with the likes of Leicester conceding 50, Man United conceding 44, Liverpool conceding 42. You look at Chelsea themselves conceded 36. I mean, they're quite strong up there, which is going to be a good thing to the final. So much flexibility for Guardiola and maturity. That's another thing that was really distinguishable in City's season. And in the end, the way that won the league was pretty interesting and pretty exciting, I would say, in the way they ran over the league and they completely smashed almost all competitors in their way before winning the league and wrapping up the league pretty early, just like Liverpool did last season, allowing themselves really some leeway, losing some games that, not necessarily worrying for them, but it didn't detract a lot from winning the Premier League, but certainly could be detractors before the Champions League final. Speaking of Manchester City, let's talk to the other side of the Manchester City, or the city of Manchester, in Man United. A season that could have been better for them. under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. They started bad, picked up decent form, albeit they started really when it matters. Recently, the UEFA Europa League final. The lack of squad depth really showed up in the big occasions with the Europa League final again. An example with Solskjaer pretty much not finding anyone to sub in the extra time. His mismanagement of some big games as well was really bad. I mean, you look at the examples. There were a lot of examples really of mismanagement for him in those games. Some Champions League encounters against Leipzig in the group stages. Some Premier League matches where he should have won and lost a couple of games against Arsenal. The couple of games against Liverpool. I mean, his mismanagement really was costly at a certain point, and he insisted on saying that we're making progress and we're making improvements and all of that, but that's not the scenario that you want to sell to your players and to your board. You really need to at least acknowledge that you are really having a bad season. Some players lost their value. We've seen some horrendous performances from some players. I mean, we saw Rashford really dipping in level this season inexplicably. Martial has been, in and out because of injuries. You had, the defense is not doing well, with the exception maybe of Luke Shaw, who's been the MVP, I would say, of Man United this season, improving a lot. Loki, their best player. De Gea, losing his place to Dean Henderson. There's just a lot of problems. I mean, Pogba, always on and off, his form is dipping. Bruno Fernandes, as good as he can be, sometimes he goes missing with certain games, and he added this bad trait this season, which is complaining to referees. Certainly, that coupled with the involvement in the Super League and the whole debacle about that, the fans rioting and all of that, it almost overshadowed everything around the football. But certainly, again, a season that could have been better, a Europa League final, a second spot in the Premier League, but certainly these things were achieved by Mourinho, so this is not quite the progress yet for Man United, and we could see them this season doing better probably with some certain improvements to their squad. Maybe get rid of some deadwood players leaving, of course, and play Van de Beek. I mean, between parentheses, please play Van de Beek. Like, the guy has suffered a lot from staying a lot at the bench. Why you bring him in for this fee with 45 million euros if you're going to sit him on the bench? I don't really know. Moving on, and to third place Liverpool, who, compared to what they were early on in the season, compared to the injuries that they had, compared to the absolute misery they found themselves into at a certain point, being in mid-table really at a certain point, being 7th and 8th in the season, it's a great ending. Being in top 4, it's a great ending. The way it happened, of course, the Alisson goal, the run that they put together as of late, it was pretty incredible. I mean, the season could be considered an anomaly for them. Again, the injuries, it just, significant really. I don't think there's any team in Europe that had as much, probably only Real Madrid would compete with them for the title of the team with most injuries really. Single-handedly by Hazard they would beat them. But again, they had the whole centre-half department out with injuries, of course. Van Dijk, Joe Gomez, Johan Matip. They had to bring in Kabak, who grew up into his role. Nathaniel Phillips, who had some bad performances, but he improved a lot. Reece Williams showing some potential, really. Alexander Arnold was injured for a while. Nico Williams had to play there. Jordan Henderson, Fabinho were pulled out of the midfield. Fabinho was missed for a while. Henderson was missed for a while. Thiago as well. Naby Keita. They missed Sadio Mane and Mo Salah for COVID reasons, and Firmino for injury. Diogo Jota missed a couple of months for injuries. It was a weird old season for Liverpool, but again, considering that what could have been, with the bad form that they've been in, at certain games it looked like they couldn't even score. The front three was a big problem this season. I mean, the tally of 68 goals is really weak comparatively what they should have been this season. You have Leicester scoring the same number of goals. You have Tottenham at 7 scoring the same amount of goals. You have Man United scoring 73. I mean, you have teams below Liverpool scoring the same amount of goals as them, which is quite the real pain when you look at it, with the front three that Liverpool have in Mane, Salah and Firmino, and you add to that Jota as an extra option really. This season could be considered an anomaly, as I mentioned. Jurgen Klopp surely is going to be thinking about next season and improving the squad, trying to change what he could change. With the players' injuries returning to fitness, this could be different, and Liverpool would be back to challenging for the title hopefully next season. Making the last of the top 4 spots is Chelsea, of course. Again, we mentioned this in the Champions League final preview. Two halves of their season, the pre-Lampard or the pre-Tuchel and the post-Tuchel. Reaching an FA Cup final, Champions League final, quite the good achievements. They didn't win the first. They still have the Champions League. If they win that, it's going to be a great season. If they don't, it would be a disappointment, but not as bad as it would be suggested or portrayed by media maybe, or by some fans on Twitter, I don't know. But certainly, regarding the transformation, it's a pretty good one. Becoming tighter in the back, more solid defensively, the second strongest defense in the league, I think, understandably, after City. I mean, it's understandable who got to the final of the Champions League, the two strongest defenses in the Premier League, and that is really, really easy to fathom, I would say. Leicester City, who, again, another collapse for them, albeit, winning the FA Cup. They spend a lot of time in the top four, yet somehow ended out of it. It's a real big achievement winning the FA Cup for the first time at the very least, so I would say, yeah, it's not the biggest disappointment of anything, but certainly could have done more with Brendan Rodgers. This could be very disappointing for him for the second season in a row. He finds himself in a situation where he collapses literally at the last day of the season, and he was winning, like he was defeating Tottenham, he was taking the lead, he could have easily broken the top four, but he let that go. West Ham on 6th, of course, deserve a big shout out for the transformation this season. Relegation fighters last season to near CL spots. David Moyes, I mean, it's a resurgence for him. All the credit goes for him. He's one of the best managers of this season. He deserves a lot of credit, really, I would say, for turning around the season, for taking Jesse Lingard, who turned his season around himself with West Ham and made a lot of progress under David Moyes, and improved a lot to help West Ham reach the 6th position. Elsewhere on the table again, Tottenham in the Conference League, Arsenal, no European football, not really surprising, I would say. It's better for them to give them a little bit of a breather. Leeds United, I think, best surprise of the season for me. They finished 9th, of course, they had a terrific season, 59 points. Their football is always enjoyable, which is really good. Everton at 10th, less than expectations, I would say, early on in the season with the spending. Carlo Ancelotti as a coach, I don't think that Carlo Ancelotti's standard as a coach is really being 10th in the Premier League. Aston Villa could have been better, but certainly they lost form in the midway through since Christmas. Newcastle, they really survived. They had a good late run. Wolverhampton, the injury of Jimenez, I would say, really hurt them a lot and didn't have the best of seasons. Crystal Palace, they're Crystal Palace. They're still around. They hover around in the mid-table. They don't have any problems in that. Southampton, who at a certain point were top of the table early on, they somehow find themselves really, in a big, almost relegated, but not quite. Brighton, they still continue to play some decent football, but not feeling rewarded for it. Burnley, barely surviving relegation, and then you have the hapless three of Fulham, West Brom, and Sheffield United, Sheffield United really disappointing considering the season they had the last time out. The most disappointing team of the season, I would say, goes to Tottenham. Again, Harry Kane being your top scorer, top assister, the best player in the league, I would say. Maybe PFA Player of the Year award is waiting, but somehow Tottenham end up in the Conference League. The whole situation with him is pretty horrible. He would be leaving, surely. There's no questions about it. He would be leaving the club this season. And obviously, it's not the Premier League season without some, controversies around it. And controversies were aplenty in the Premier League. Obviously, there was VAR, the Super League fallout, which affected a whole host of teams and all of that, and sparked protest and social media blaze and the media reacting and all of that. And you have the financial issues. It was a really turbulent Premier League season, and in the end, City were their champions, of course, deservedly, as I mentioned, and definitely the team that has to be, the team to beat next season. Of course, the top scorers of the Premier League to end up this review: Harry Kane, 23 goals, Mo Salah coming short with 22, Bruno Fernandes with 18, 17 for Heung-min Son, Patrick Bamford, 16 for Dominic Calvert-Lewin, 15 for Vardy, Ollie Watkins, 14 goals, Ilkay Gundogan, 13, and Alexander Lacazette with 13 goals. That's it from me for this episode. I was your boy, the HID of the PSP, live like, share, comment on the YouTube version of this, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Enable notifications to receive all the updates from these episodes and all the other content on the channel. Of course, tomorrow is going to be the last regular episode of the season. We're going to do a magazine episode, and of course, on Sunday will be the last episode of the season, reviewing the Champions League final and all of that, and then we take a 1 week break before returning 1 week before the Euros to start previewing and start talking about the Euros group by group, and of course squad by squad. Hopefully we're going to get to talk about the Euros. Thanks for watching. Of course, listen to our Spotify, Google Podcast or any other platform, and until tomorrow, I will be seeing you soon. Goodbye.